The Frogs by Aristophanes is a hilarious, thought-provoking satirical play where gods are foolish, poets and dramatists are wise, and there's a meaningful lesson in any journey. It was staged in 405 BCE during the Peloponnesian War from 431 to 404 BCE between Athens and Sparta, just a year before Athens surrendered to Sparta after the loss of its fleet. By the time The Frogs was written, Athens was in serious decline. Some of the issues plaguing Athens in 405 BCE included changes in leadership, more restrictive laws, and declined focus on traditional values. Tragic playwrights, including Sophocles, Euripides, and Aeschylus, wrote of these issues, and their popularity led to greater public awareness and activism. But by 405 BCE, all of these great tragedians had died, some very recently. In The Frogs, Aristophanes sends Dionysus to the underworld to retrieve Euripides, the tragic playwright, for the alleged purpose of helping to restore Athens to its former glory. The hilarious play has two central characters, Dionysus the god and his slave, Xanthias. Dionysus starts out as a comic character who exchanges quips with his slave, Xanthias. Later, he becomes a serious and knowledgeable judge in Hades. His decision to ultimately bring Aeschylus back to the land of the living is the climax of the play. Xanthias, though only a slave, is depicted as Dionysus' equal in almost every way. He's certainly at least funny and intelligent like Dionysus and outwits him several times. As the play begins, the god Dionysus enters along with Xanthias, who's riding a donkey. Dionysus is dressed up as Hercules, wearing a lion skin and carrying a club. Xanthias is carrying a heavy load on his back. The two exchange raunchy jokes intended for the audience. For example, the bit about how you need to shift your load to take a piss. And then they arrive at Hercules' home. After answering the door, Hercules sees Dionysus in costume and dissolves into giggles. I can't stop laughing. I'll try biting my lip. No use. I can't stop laughing at him. Dionysus then explains the reason for his visit. He has an overwhelming urge to visit the recently deceased tragic poet Euripides. The only way to do this is to visit Hades, and Hercules is known to have made such a visit and returned back to the land of the living. Hercules, after some banter, provides directions to Hades. Dionysus and Xanthias start on their journey, but are separated when Xanthias, because he's a slave, is not allowed aboard the boat that crosses the lake. Dionysus and a few extras, under the guidance of Charon, the ferryman, row across the river. As they cross the water, they encounter a chorus of singing frogs, with whom Dionysus competes to see who can be the loudest. On the other side of the lake, Dionysus and Xanthias reunite. They immediately encounter a terrifying, shape-changing monster. And before they can continue on their journey, they're interrupted by the chorus, this time portraying human initiates who worship Dionysus. Finally, Dionysus and Xanthias make their way to Pluto's house and knock on the door. Dionysus, still dressed in his lion skin, is mistaken for Hercules, who took the three-headed dog Cerberus from Hades. Aeschylus, a gatekeeper in Hades, threatens this Hercules for stealing the dog. To avoid a fight, cowardly Dionysus switches clothing with Xanthias. But Xanthias, as Hercules, is then asked by a beautiful servant woman to join her and her lovely comrades at a banquet. Xanthias and Dionysus switch clothes again, so Dionysus can enjoy the ladies and the feast. But before the two can leave for the banquet, two innkeepers confront Dionysus and threaten to beat him up for stealing food when they think Dionysus is Hercules, was last seen in Hades. Dionysus once again prevails on Xanthias to switch outfits. Now, Aeschylus accuses Xanthias, as Hercules, of stealing Cerberus and threatens to imprison him. Xanthias claims he's innocent and suggests that Aeschylus should torture his slave, Dionysus, to hear the truth of the matter. Both Dionysus and Xanthias claim to be gods, both withstanding whipping, and both are cleared of Hercules' crimes. This scene, just like one earlier in the play, depicts the key symbol of the lion skin. Dionysus has been wearing a lion skin and carrying a club in imitation of the clothes Hercules wore when he visited the underworld and returned alive. The lion skin provides a symbol of confused identity, as Hercules himself laughs at Dionysus, who believes himself to be as menacing as Hercules actually is. Here in this comical scene, the lion skin is traded back and forth between Dionysus and his slave Xanthias, as each attempts to take on or shed the identity of Hercules. In the long run, both Dionysus and Xanthias must shed the lion skin and take back their own identities, Dionysus as a god and Xanthias as a slave. Now Dionysus and Xanthias are welcome to Hades. They learn that they're just in time for an exciting duel between the poet and playwright Euripides and Aeschylus. Each has claimed to be the best tragic poet. Pluto, king of the underworld, makes Dionysus the judge, and the two poets present their arguments. Each quotes from and satirizes the other's work, mocking the language, meter, characters, and other aspects of one another's plays. Finally, Dionysus, as a fair and knowledgeable judge, asks for a balance to weigh the merit of each poet's work. Each poet puts verses into the balance, knowing that the heavier verses will win. This balance, or scale, is another major symbol in the play. A scale is used to weigh the quality of the arguments during this debate between Euripides and Aeschylus. Scales were and are used to represent justice, and they were the symbol of the Greek goddess Themis. Although the idea of weighing the words of the poets is treated as a joke in the Frogs, there is an underlying seriousness to this symbol. In the Frogs, the central conflict is between the work of two poets whose ideas represent traditional values, Aeschylus, and modern values, Euripides. The scale weighs the two men's ideas, and their use suggests that those ideas espoused by Aeschylus are just right and good. Sure enough, when Aeschylus wins the debate, he's allowed to return with his teachings to the land of the living. The hope expressed in the play is that the ideas found to be weightiest and thus most just will be returned to the people of Athens. Aeschylus, indeed, manages to cite the heavier verses, winning the contest. But Dionysus is not yet ready to make his judgment. Now he asks the two poets to give advice to the people of Athens, who, at the time the play was performed, were still in the throes of the Peloponnesian War. Once again, Aeschylus wins, this time by giving good and useful advice. Pluto gives permission for Aeschylus to return to the land of the living. Sophocles, and not Euripides, will become the poet laureate of Hades. As readers, or audiences, likely could discern, the funny play has a number of thought-provoking major themes. First is the return to old ways. According to the character of Dionysus in the Frogs, only the older, now deceased poets had any talent. Dionysus undertakes his journey to Hades to bring back the famed Euripides, who had exhorted the people to greater moral heights. Along the way, the chorus describes how the Athenians have lost their ability to judge worthy men. Once in Hades, Dionysus is asked to preside over a contest between the poets Aeschylus and Euripides. This provides each character, and the chorus, with the opportunity to explore how older tragedies positively impacted the moral character of Athens. For example, the character of Aeschylus, along with the chorus, helps communicate the idea that only by returning to the older traditions of poetry, art, and morality will Athens survive. This theme is important to Aristophanes, who was writing toward the end of a long war with Sparta, which Athens would eventually lose. Euripides, more practical than Aeschylus, nevertheless believes that his now defunct style of poetry improved the ability of Athenians to think intelligently and make wise choices. Without access to the types of messages, morals, and social models presented in his plays, Euripides suggests the people of Athens will not understand that if we reversed our course, we might be saved. Yet this argument is ultimately rejected in favor of that of Aeschylus, who argues that Athenian survival is dependent on the tradition of his works. The theme of identity arises multiple times over the course of the play. Dionysus first appears on stage dressed as Hercules in lion skin and club. Later, a comic scene has Dionysus and Xanthias appearing as Hercules, and then as one another. The servants and innkeepers in Hades are confused over just who they're dealing with, and are finally convinced that both Dionysus and his slave are actually gods. Aristophanes uses the identity theme to make his political point. Throughout the play, he calls out contemporary politicians for not actually being who they appear to be, talking the talk, but not walking the walk, so to speak, which is dangerous for society. Within the play, Dionysus pretends to be greater and stronger by portraying Hercules, but cannot live up to who he's pretending to be. But when Dionysus finally reveals who he is, the god of theater, he gets his power back and rightfully judges the competition between the playwrights, something he's totally qualified to do. However, in the reverse, Xanthias, though only a slave, is shown to have better qualities, and qualities that are underappreciated because of his social position. In this way, Aristophanes seems to be showing that the quality of a person isn't dependent on their status, servant, or god, but in either case, it's best to not pretend to be something you're not. Then there's the theme of the importance of poetry and drama. The role of poetry and drama was particularly significant in ancient Greece, when other forms of mass communication were in their infancy. Aeschylus and Euripides were two of the most significant tragic poet-playwrights of their time. Both had died relatively recently when Aristophanes wrote The Frogs. No living poet, according to the character of Dionysus, could compete with these great talents. In fact, all of the living poets were chatterboxes, twittering swallows in a music hall, mere foliage, disgraces to the artist's craft. In Hades, a large portion of the chorus's exposition and the debate, or agon, between Aeschylus and Euripides is dedicated to the important role poetry and drama play in shaping the thoughts and behaviors of the citizens. This is an unusual approach for Aristophanes, whose prior plays, Lysistrata and the Clouds, among others, were dedicated almost exclusively to political satire. Aeschylus champions the importance of poetry and theater as a tool for instilling proper values in citizens. He quotes extensively from his own work, offering audiences the opportunity to recall and consider the impact of his tragic plays. He also discusses the significance of poetry and theater as tools for improving the life of Athenians. The play may be ancient by today's standards, but in its time, Aristophanes overturned many of old comedy's conventions. For instance, The Frogs, performed in 405 BCE at winter and spring festivals, reorganizes the usual structure of Greek comedy and adds a unique chorus of frogs. Another of Aristophanes' innovations was to split the chorus, usually representing a unified group of citizens, into two opposing groups, representing the old men and old women of Athens. As his career progressed, Aristophanes dispensed with more and more of the traditional structures of old comedy, including the prominent role of the chorus. By the time Aristophanes died, around 388 BCE, old comedy was effectively finished. Aristophanes' innovations helped pioneer the new forms that arose in its place.